Good afternoon. I'm Lucy Beednell with the ARC of Northern Virginia. I'm so pleased that folks have registered and some are able to join us live today. We are going to talk through something that we know families rely on really, really heavily today, but maybe don't always fully understand or understand how to plan and prepare and navigate some of those troubleshooting areas. And I joke often that the ARC is there for the ungoogleable, right? You just are looking and looking and looking, and no matter how clever you are, you're not going to find it by searching around. And the women who here today are queens of that, right? They've helped people navigate really challenging situations that are super difficult to figure out related to life insurance and disability denials and appeals. We know that those kinds of benefits and plans are something that so many of us rely on to take care of our families in the future, realizing that we're probably not going to get the chance to live forever. So without further ado, I would love to turn things over to them. And ladies, please teach us all the things. We're eager to learn.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jenny, and I just thought I'd give you a brief introduction about myself. I grew up in New York. I went to Boston College, and I then married my husband, who is an Army officer. He served for 30 years, so I moved a lot. Held various positions, both paid and volunteer. And I mention that because I understand what all of you are going through. I have a son, David, who's 28 years old, who was diagnosed with autism about when he was about 2.5 years old. And I mention that also because that is when I was introduced to the ARC. I went to the ARC in Massachusetts, and I went to them for resources and just to learn about IEPs. They had a library then that wasn't online. You went in there and borrowed books from them. But I'm still finding the ARC a great resource. And so I just really appreciate that Lucy's given us this opportunity here. So as you can imagine, with being 30 years as a military spouse, we've had to recreate David's programming in a lot of different places. So I've learned a lot, but like you, I feel like I'm still learning. Every time I think that I've got it under control, I'll learn about a new law or a different review or something that kind of rocks my world. So that's a little bit about me. I met Ellen, my partner, about 12 years ago, my partner in crime and business now. And our daughters actually were really good friends when we were stationed in Hawaii. And then we became fast friends. And then we were fortunate enough to work together at a local law firm who specialized in both disability and insurance appeals. And now we're working together at Insurance Appeal Consultants. So that's me.
Super. Thank you, Jen.
You're welcome.
My name is Ellen Bresnahan, and I have a similar story to Jen. I do not have a disabled adult child to care for, but I've been a military spouse and in the military for 30-something years. I retired as an intelligence officer. I retired as a commander a little while ago, and got into the disability and life insurance appeal business for a local law firm and loved that business. And the hardest part of that business really was turning away most of the people who came to us for help because their cases didn't meet the criteria of, what we were able to help with. Oftentimes, they were the odd ducks, the case value was relatively small. And, Jenny and I just started feeling like there was an opportunity there to, really help people who were not able to be served by the existing models. So we founded Insurance Appeal Consultants. We've been up and running since the beginning of the year. Really, I guess February was our first big month. And, so far our biggest problem is having enough hours of the day to respond to people. So Lucy, we really appreciate the opportunity to, speak to a number of people at once and, to have the webinar that's going to be a resource for people going forward as they navigate what, certainly is always an overwhelming part of somebody's care plan and, life financial plan for them and for their families. And it's the kind of thing that can get so complicated. It's very tempting to just say, I have my policy, I have disability insurance, I have life insurance, I'm good. And then you don't realize that there was possibly more to it until you go to make a claim. And at that point, when you have the claim, it already is when you have the least flexibility, to sort of work with it and make sure it conforms to the policy coverage that you actually have. So we love, while our business is helping people appeal denials, we love the chance to get in front of people before a denial arises, usually before a claim even arises. Just give you some kind of general background and information about, about the whole process. How does life insurance work? How does, the life insurance that we're talking about, how does that integrate maybe with some other policies that you have? How do life insurance and disability insurance work together? Just sort of, talk through some general knowledge questions, and hopefully be a resource for people before they even need to make a claim. So if they ever do, that process just goes smoothly.
Thank you, Ellen. So one thing I wanted to mention is Lucy reached out to us a few days ago when we were talking about this webinar, and she had mentioned that one thing that we wanted to cover first was that many of you are looking at life insurance as a possible way to fund your loved one's care after you pass. So I wanted to start with that first. Personally, I wanted to share that my husband and I do have what many of you probably already have is either a term or a whole life policy in our names that we have for our son as a beneficiary. So for instance, we opened up a third-party trust for our son a few years ago. So our term and whole life policies now have his special needs trust as the beneficiary. We changed his individual name to the trust name. Likewise, when my husband retired from the service, we wanted to preserve his benefit, his military retirement. So we opened up a special needs trust with the ARC for a first person. And the very first thing we did is we went to the experts, and Lucy and her team are the experts. So now we have his special needs trust as a beneficiary for my husband's benefit. So what Ellen and I want to talk to you today about is a different type of life insurance, okay? And so I'd like Ellen to take over now, and we're going to talk about that type of life insurance. We're going to talk about what to look for when you're applying, what are some of the pitfalls. So I'm going to let Ellen take over for right now.
Sure, thanks, Jen. You mentioned term life insurance and whole life, which is really kind of where the conversation starts. Those are the two main types of life insurance you can have. A whole life policy is invariably a private policy that you buy through an insurance broker. And, in general, whole life policies will pay out when you die. They're not limited. There are fewer exclusions than there are with term life insurance policies. And that's not our area of expertise, although we recognize it's a really important foundation for a lot of people's planning. And you'll have the place to start if you have any questions about your whole life policy is with the person who sold you the policy. They should be able to answer any questions that you have. What we're talking about is term life insurance, and it's life insurance that you have that covers you until a certain age. And it's really common if you're not anticipating supporting, a child, an adult child, indefinitely. You'll have a term life policy to maybe get you through the college years, years when your expenses could exceed, whatever income your loved ones have coming in if you die. And there are several types of term life insurance policies too. You can, go and purchase one from the same person who sold you your whole life insurance policy. But we're going to be talking about the type of term life that you can get through your association, normally with an employer. Sometimes also your association through like maybe a trade organization. If you belong to a union, they might sponsor a group life insurance plan, but most of the time it's your employer. And they'll, so you have to be employed to be eligible for the type of life insurance that we're talking about. And the way to figure out whether you even have coverage is to start with human resources. Companies are not required to offer life insurance or disability benefits. It's always an option, something that they can offer as an employee benefit if they choose to. In general, the larger the employer, the more likely it is that they have both life insurance and disability insurance to cover their employees. So you want to figure out you may be able to look at your employee benefit handbook. It may talk about in there. If you're not entirely sure, talk to human resources. And then once you know whether or not you are covered, I mean, that gives you some power, right? Some information. If you know that your employer does not offer life insurance, that is a signal to you. You got to go try to find it somewhere else if that's a need that you're going to have, going forward. And I'm sure, that's something that is Googleable, like, how do I get life insurance? And you'll get some ideas from there. If your employer does offer a group benefit life insurance policy, you want to find out a few things about it. First, as quickly as you can, you want to get a copy of the policy itself. You can have like the one-page overview that just says, you have life insurance. But especially if this is something that is going to be a need to have for your family rather than a nice extra benefit, should you pass away before they're anticipating it. If it's something that they're going to need to have, you're going to want to know, all the details about the coverage that you have. The first thing you need to know is the amount of life insurance. There's usually a base amount that every employee gets. I've seen as low as $25,000, $50,000. Sometimes it's a multiple of your salary. Your base benefit will be 1 times your salary, 1.5 times. And then oftentimes there is an option for voluntary life insurance. You can purchase more of this term life insurance if you want. And then that will come with an added premium, obviously, but that can be a significant amount of life insurance. Usually 5, 6, 7, 8 times your salary is what's available to you to purchase. I think that's the basics of what know that whether or not you have coverage, ask for a copy of your policy so you can read the details and know the amount. That gets you started.
That's terrific, Ellen. I think it would be interesting for all of us actually to hear what are some of the pitfalls? Like, what are some of the things that you've seen gone wrong? Because I think that will help people get it right at the application stage. Could you share maybe 1 or 2 things that you saw, that just to look out for?
Sure. Yeah. Because there are some commonalities, right? We say, we'll probably sound like a broken record by the end of this webinar, but we'd say, like, it depends on the policy. So everything is going to depend on your individual policy. There's some global similarities between all of them, but just when I think, Jenny, we had a case the other day with somebody who had disability benefits, and every single policy we've had, the limit for these benefits is 2 years, and we just looked at his policy and it's 5 years. So the policies are like fingerprints. It's why you have to have a copy of yours to know the details of your benefits. But in general, what we see is some pitfalls are if you don't become covered by a policy when you start working. Say you started working, you didn't have an extra $20 a month that you wanted to use to pay for life insurance. You didn't need it. You didn't have any dependents. But 5 years down the road, all of a sudden that looks like you're like, that would be good to have. This term life insurance through my employer is relatively affordable compared to some other coverage that you can buy. So yeah, I think I will buy into this policy. Read the policy, because a lot of them have separate requirements for if you're covered when you first start working, when you're first eligible. Usually there are no requirements for coverage. You are covered. You need to know a little bit about that. Sometimes you're covered the first day you start working. Sometimes you're covered the next calendar month. Sometimes you're covered after you've been there for a full calendar month or 6 months, but that'll be different. But in general, you can, if you become covered when you're first eligible, there are no other requirements other than employment. If you wait, this is often true for disability insurance too. If you wait and elect coverage later, the insurance company has the right to say, yes, we'll cover you, or no, we won't cover you. There's usually a form that you have to fill out that discloses your medical conditions, your medical history, often called an evidence of insurability form. You have to return that. That has to go into the system, and your coverage has to be approved. And if that all sounds like a little bit vague, like you fill out the form, you give it in, it goes in the system, it's because that's where we see a lot of claims tripped up. There's no good system for that. Employers, it happens so rarely that somebody will become covered later. Employers may not even be aware that they have to give this evidence of insurability form for you to fill out. Insurance companies know that you need to fill it out, but they are not necessarily tracking that they're receiving premiums for Jenny. They're not necessarily tracking that Jenny has filled out all the required paperwork to be insured. So it's not until Jenny passes away or family puts in a claim that the insurance company then starts to investigate and says, oh, she didn't actually have coverage after all. She was supposed to fill out the evidence of insurability form. She didn't fill it out. It's nothing we can do. And then you get into, then you need a lawyer. And for a lot of these things, we can give you general information about the process, but when the process comes home to you and your claim and you have an issue, you have to talk to a lawyer. A lawyer is going to tell you you have a legal issue, you don't have a legal issue, and you can go in either direction. Oftentimes that initial review is free. When they can tell you, yes, you have an issue we can help you with, or no, you don't. But if you wind it back and you read in your policy, it's all there. That's what the insurance company relies on. They're like, it's in the policy. You're supposed to fill out evidence of insurability. The other thing that we see, a pitfall, that we see is people think that they have general life insurance coverage when they only have accidental death coverage, or they think they understand, generally like what accidental death would mean, but the insurance company will say, even though you're in this horrible car accident, the thing that killed you was the heart attack, and so that's not covered as an accident. And then you end up, your doctors are fighting with, the only reason she had a heart attack is because she had the car accident. And, sometimes there's nothing you can do to avoid those things, but that's the kind of problem that arises with these claims. And I think the bottom line for there is don't take the insurance company's first word for it. If they try to deny your claim, you're going to get a letter that sounds ironclad. It's going to sound like, wow, I didn't know, and now I have no chance because they've just, crossed all their T's, dotted all their I's. I don't have coverage. What a shame. Don't take that as your first answer. Always show that letter to an attorney, and the attorney will tell you, yes, you have a case here. No, you don't. Jenny and I are not attorneys, and we help cases when the attorney says, we can't help you. That's where we step in And we're sort of the second line of review for cases like that. When you need to appeal these group life insurance decisions, group disability insurance decisions, your first appeal is called an administrative appeal. It's not a legal case yet. You're required to do that initial appeal. If you don't, your case is dead in the water. But once you do the initial appeal, if the insurance company agrees with you, they will pay your benefits. It's not until they disagree with your appeal and deny your appeal that you have a true legal issue that you need to go to court to resolve.
Great. Thank you, Ellen. At this time, I just wanted to ask Lucy if you had any questions for us before we move on to our next subject.
Something you all mentioned, which makes perfect sense about a lot of these policies coming through employers, makes me wonder, how realistic is it for families to bank on this, knowing that they may change jobs at some point? And is this really a healthy expectation that this policy is going to be there because you had it with one employer and another employer may or may not have any coverage at all or completely different plans?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's something that you need to understand. That's why we say, like, understand all the benefits that are available to you. Because before you change employers, that's a good thing to know, that you may be giving up the coverage with your current employer, and you want to ask your new employer, is this something that they offer as well?
So it seems like this is the kind of thing families would be thinking about along the same terms of asking about a 401k plan or health insurance, right? That if you come to rely on this with one employer, that should be presented as part of the benefits package right up front when you're thinking about taking this position. And if you're relying on it, accepting a job or not may hinge on whether or not that's there, given how valuable this may be to your family. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also the sort of thing, especially with life insurance, where when you start a job, depending on your situation, when you start the job, it may not be a big deal to you. You may not even register whether they offer life insurance or not. So it's not until you've been employed for a while and your situation changes that it becomes a valuable benefit for you. And at that point, yeah, you want to make sure that it will carry over to a new employer as well.
And I think that's a good parlay. Like, I think that's the same for disability benefits. I think we all, there are times where we take a job, but we don't necessarily think right away, geez, I wonder what the disability plan is. I wonder if I get hurt or if I get ill, what are the disability benefits? How does that interact with any life insurance policy that we have with the company? What happens next? So.
Yeah, that's a really good point about how the disability and life insurance policies interact, because it's not necessarily something that you think of as being connected, but it really can be. If you have a disability that causes you to leave work, it depends on the employer, what status you have, what your employment status is, and every employer usually has a different policy about that. If they're large enough, they have to comply with the Family and Medical Leave Act, which provides generally job protected leave for you for, I think it's 90 days. 90 days, not a very long time if you're disabled. And so after that, it's all over the board, whether some employers will keep you on, consider you an active employee, even though you're not actively at work, you're still their employee. Maybe that'll last as long as your benefit claim lasts and you're still disabled. Maybe it'll last for the period of short-term disability benefits only, but when you transition to long-term disability, your employment status changes. It can vary widely among employers. But in almost every case, if you have both disability insurance and life insurance, life insurance has a provision that will waive your premium for you if you are disabled. The definitions of disability can be different. You can be disabled under your disability policy because you can't do your own job. but you would not be eligible for a life waiver of premium because you're not disabled under their definition, which requires you to be unable to perform any job. So that gets complicated. When you leave your employer, sometimes the life insurance company will offer to convert your policy from a group policy to an individual policy. And then the payment of the premium would be entirely on you. And often the benefit amount is vastly reduced for that. It's not, you can't carry the same amount of insurance, even though you think, oh, I converted my life insurance policy. You did, but you may have converted from, $100,000 policy to a $10,000 policy because it's all the insurance company would offer you. So it's important to understand once one domino starts to go, and it's usually that disability claim, like what else is going to be affected by that? Are your health benefits going to be affected? Is your life insurance benefit going to be affected? And retirement benefits.
And we're often asked, how do I find out if I have a disability plan? Who do they go to?
Yeah, same as it'd be the same person to talk to as you would about life insurance, which is human resources. Most places do have an employee handbook, and it will list what your benefits are. And disability insurance is one of the listed benefits. Just because an employer offers you disability benefits doesn't necessarily mean that you are a participant in the program. So let's talk for a few minutes about when the baseline is your employer has to offer this as a program, but then assuming they do, are you covered by it? And that's where you want to get the policy, you want to read the policy. It will tell you exactly what the requirements are for what makes you eligible for coverage. And this gets into a lot, Jenny, with, so with parents and caretakers, but also sometimes with their adult children who are working. Like David has a job, and they may be eligible for their own disability insurance through their employer, depending on, if they're working 30 hours a week, is often a cutoff for part-time. If they're working part-time, full-time, they may have their own coverage through their own job, and that's an important thing to figure out. But talk to human resources. Know if your employer offers a policy. If they do, get a copy of the policy, read it to know whether or not you are covered specifically.
That's correct. And so I thought it might be a good time for me to give a personal example, because I think it might be relevant with the audience that we have here. And I actually called David's human resources officer today. So my son David works through ServiceSource, which I know many of you might be familiar with. He has a group supported employment job through a company called Securus, and he dismantles and recycles electronics through his job. And he has a coach from ServiceSource. So ServiceSource is his employer and offers him all of his benefits, like life insurance. They have a disability plan for him. He has vacation days, okay? So what Ellen alluded to earlier is he gets Social Security disability because he has autism, completely different program, okay? But he's employed by ServiceSource, and ServiceSource offers a disability plan to all of their employees. Okay, it's 60% of their salary. They have an open enrollment once a year. So if he started not feeling well, you can't just decide, oh, I think I'm going to apply for disability benefits right now. You've got to enroll during the open enrollment period. That's with ServiceSource. Other companies are different. So a good example is he works with his hands. He handles tools. So say David and I are hiking and he broke his arm. Hopefully it never happens, but he broke his arm and he's unable to work and manage with the screwdrivers. We would go to his human resources department and say, we want to put in a disability claim because he has a hand injury. completely different than his autism, okay? But we would then have to work together with his doctor and get doctor support, somebody who's going to back us and say that David is unable to return to work at this time. Ellen and I are going to talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. But one thing that I did want to mention to all of you is, what did Ellen keep saying? Check the policy, check the policy, check the policy. Okay. One of the things we'll talk more about is there's an offset section in each disability policy. And it talks about, if you are on disability, what are some other income offsets that might offset and lower the disability benefits that you're getting from your company. So in David's situation, if he got injured and he went on disability through his company, that's 60% of his benefit. But what offsets that? In the policy, if I check Social Security disability and maybe my husband's VA benefit may offset his whole entire income that he's getting from Service Source. So for me personally, probably doesn't make sense for us to pay for a disability plan for David if what he has already is going to offset that whole benefit. But for some, there may be policies that don't have those offset, and it is good. So it is definitely a personal decision. If you don't understand your policy, people like Ellen and I are good resources to go to, and could you help us understand what we're reading? So thank you for letting me share that personal story, but I hope that helped some of you.
I'm glad to know that Service Source offers a disability policy for all their workers.
They do.
And I would like to read it because
Yeah.
in some policies, they all, you're right, they all offset for other income. The whole general premise of disability benefits is that you wouldn't be able to take in more income from being disabled than you can from working. You know, so that's an important thing for people to understand when they think like, oh, I'll get 60% of my salary, plus if I'm really disabled, I'll be eligible for SSDI, and those two added together, you know, I'll be at or above what I was making as I was working. It doesn't ever work that way with these group disability policies in particular. Sometimes with individual disability policies, which are much more expensive, though you can get those without the offset for SSDI, but group policies always offset for SSDI, except many of them, not all of them, many of them have exceptions for benefits that you're receiving already before you became disabled. So if David was receiving, if he has a policy like this, if he was receiving disability benefits based on his autism diagnosis, and then you know, he's still working, those are obviously not disabling him because he's, you know, holding a 30-hour-a-week important job, and then he becomes injured from that because he broke his arm. It's possible, many policies say, those disability benefits that you're receiving for a different disability, they do not offset your disability benefit for this new injury. So in that case, he can keep getting the SSDI that he was getting before, and then 60% of his salary from Service Source.
So it might be worth it.
Yeah, it would be worth checking out because you're at and it, you know, I mean, I can see it in my head. It's the other income section. You go down the list, there's, you know, Social Security disability benefits, and some have that clause that say, except this will not apply to any benefits that you are already receiving. And some don't have that clause.
Gotcha.
So that's why you really have to dig in to know what you're buying, right?
And that's your military intelligence backgrounds. Coming to light.
Yes.
So, you know, I skipped ahead a little bit just telling that story, but I think it would be really great, Ellen, if we just describe to our audience, I'd like you to do this, just what's the difference between a disability claim that you would apply for through the Social Security Administration and a disability plan, say through your group or your a private plan, because as an intake specialist at our previous law firm and what we're doing at Insurance Appeal Consultants, I get that question all the time. And so could you just talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah, and it's very confusing to people because, they'll call for help with their long-term disability claim, and, you ask them, "Well, do you have insurance?" And they're, "But I have a long-term disability." So the terminology is really confusing. It means one thing in one setting and something else in a different setting. In general, you're eligible for SSDI from the government if you have worked a minimum of 40 quarters in your lifetime, so about 10 years. So after about 10 years of work history, you become eligible for SSDI if you ever become disabled. It's the same, it's a process unto itself. It's got its own application. It's got its own, weirdness. So many percentage of claims are denied initially, and then people win the appeal. There's a whole separate set of non-attorney advocates and attorneys, who help with SSDI claims. But basically, the eligibility for SSDI is that you were working at some point. You may or may not be working when you become disabled and eligible for SSDI. There's a window. It's, you have to have worked, within the recent past, but it isn't directly tied to your current employment. Your long-term disability benefits or short-term disability benefits through your employer's plan are different. They depend on whether your employer offers a plan. They depend on whether you are enrolled in the plan. As you found out, David not enrolled because he would need to. It's not the type of plan where, hey, just by showing up and being employed, you're covered. You have to affirmatively enroll in it. It sounds like he would have to pay the premiums for his coverage and not his employer. Those plans are always different. Sometimes your employer pays for the coverage. You're covered automatically because you showed up to work on day one. Other times, no, you would have to pay the coverage and you would have to elect in order to participate in the program. But say you are covered, you did whatever your individual policy says you have to do to be covered by that policy. You are covered. You're only, as Lucy alluded to, you're only covered as long as you work for that employer. And that can be a thing. So you can't leave work and then get in a car accident a week later and put in your disability claim. It has to be a disability that arises when you were employed. And then there's some, gray area in that of if it arose while you were employed, but you didn't make a claim before you left work, that can all get quite complicated. But in general, it's something that happens to you while you are working, and means that you can't work anymore. It can be a short-term thing. You broke your arm, that's going to be like 3 months that you're out doing casting and rehab, maybe surgery. Many companies will offer a short-term policy to cover that period, usually the first 3 to 6 months of a disability. And those programs, short-term disability programs, usually have a little bit different rules. They're usually not maybe funded by a large insurance company like New York Life or Anthem, MetLife. They're often what's referred to as payroll programs. It's just basically how your employer will continue sick leave if you become short-term disabled. If at the end of whatever the STD period is for your employer, 3 months, 6 months, you can't return to work, that often will turn into a long-term disability claim. Those are almost always, unless you have a really large employer, those are always policies that are funded by an insurance company. Your employer bought a policy from MetLife. They bought one from New York Life. Or any one of a number of carriers. And that will be different. So if you have both, you want a copy of your short-term disability policy from your employer to look at those terms. You want a copy of the long-term disability plan from the insurance company to look at those terms. I'll tell you the one thing that we see trip people up all the time is if you had a pre-existing condition, say you had some back problems, and you started a job and you're able to work, for maybe like even 6 or 9 months in your job, but your back problem flared up and you had to go out of work. You apply for short-term disability, you're approved. That's one program that has one set of rules, you're approved. It's maybe a 6-month program. You receive benefits for 6 months. Unlike all the other times where your doctors were able to get you healthy and get you back to work, this time they're not able to get you healthy. You're not returning to work. So now you go to put in your long-term disability claim, thinking it's easy. Your short-term was approved. You have the same disability, same doctor support. Your long-term claim is denied because the insurance company tells you that this was a pre-existing condition and they don't cover pre-existing conditions. So that's a really important clause to look for in your long-term policy, because a lot of times what they'll do is, they'll look back. If you go out of work, say, anytime in the first year of employment, and that I said 12 months, it's different in every policy. Some policies are 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. I've seen 2 years. If you go out at any point in that pre-existing condition time period, they will look back at a period of time before you became employed at your medical records. That period varies. I've seen 3 months, 6 months, a year, to see if you were treated for the same condition, and if you are, it's considered pre-existing and it's not covered. So that can be a rude awakening.
And I will attest that Ellen and I have actually seen denial letters where people miss eligibility by about 1 month because they applied too soon. And you can't always rely on a human resources person saying, you might want to wait a little while longer. And so again, know your policy.
Yeah.
Ellen, you started touching on something that I think is probably important for our families to understand, because absolutely we have parents looking at these policies to fund themselves, to fund a future for a child with a disability. But as Jenny mentioned, we have workers with developmental disabilities.
Right.
And by nature of that developmental disability, they have a pre-existing condition. How do they work about navigating these kinds of things, given that if it's their own employer plan, obviously their disability doesn't prevent them from working? Should they be leery of being denied just because of an autism diagnosis or a Down syndrome diagnosis right off the bat?
So I would never put anything past an insurance company. We've seen some really wacky denials. Yeah. But in general, you want to get the policy, you want to read the policy. But usually they are talking about the pre-existing condition clauses only cover new conditions that put you out of work. So if you have autism, but you're out of work because you have a broken arm, that's usually covered. If you have autism and your condition worsens so that, the autism now is the disabling condition where it wasn't previously, then that would be a problem, depending on how long it took. Now, these pre-existing condition clauses don't last forever, as Jenny was just alluding to. It may be that it's only they're only written for, like, if you go out within the first 6 months, 12 months, 24 months of employment. If you make it past that pre-existing condition period, then there are no pre-existing conditions. You can have autism, have worked with it for a year, 2 years, whatever your policy says, and then it worsens and becomes disabling. You're covered. It's no longer considered pre-existing.
That's great to know.
And another question that we get often, and it ties back into SSDI, but so could you just touch on, if you are on claim, so you successfully are on long-term disability through your company, do you have to apply for Social Security disability?
Yes. Well, So we always, people ask us like, do I have to? And our answer is always like, no, you don't have to. You don't have to fill out that form. You don't have to apply for Social Security disability. You just need to understand the costs of not complying with what the policy says. So you don't have to fill out the form, but then they don't have to give you disability benefits. You don't have to apply for Social Security disability, but your policy gives the insurance company the right to offset your disability benefit by what they think you should receive for Social Security. And that's usually pretty easy to figure out because they know what your salary was, they know your age, and they can get a rough calculation of what your SSDI benefit should be. So you can choose not to apply, and the insurance company will say, right, well, we think you're eligible, and so we're going to reduce your benefit. Even though you haven't applied and you're not receiving it, we'll reduce your benefit by what we think you're eligible to receive. So in practice, yes, everybody needs to apply for Social Security disability. The terms of those programs are a little different, and you'd asked about this, and I kind of went in a different direction a little bit. They have Social Security disability has an exclusion period where, from your date of disability, no benefits are payable for like the first 5 months, I think it is. And so it's nice when you have an employer's disability policy that will cover you for those five months. And then after that, uh, Social Security disability will only pay if they deem that you're disabled from any occupation that would be reasonable for you under their rules. Usually long-term disability policies will only pay if you're disabled from doing your own occupation under their rules for the first period of time. So depending on the rules, it can be, quote unquote, easier. None of this is easy, but it can be, easier to get approved for Social Security than it is for long-term disability, or vice versa. But usually the criteria for applying for Social Security disability is normally that you project that the disability is going to last for at least a year. So usually with the insurance company, they will give you a grace period where they don't require you to apply for SSDI, but when it's clear that your disability is going to, keep progressing or not get better by their, 2-year cutoff between your own occupation and any occupation, then they will tell you you need to apply.
Okay.
Given
And
all of these layers of complication and the many places people can get denied, is it usually wise for families to get multiple policies? Maybe mom has one through her employer, dad has one through his, their bank offers a free $10,000 policy to all members, right? I mean, does it make sense to do all of that, or do they risk canceling each other out or getting too complicated to file?
Yeah, I think the last one you said, the bank offers a free $10,000 policy. Yes, every free policy that you can get, you should take. For the rest of it, it's you should get all the coverage that you can afford to get. And the group employment, the group benefit insurance through your employer is nice because it's usually relatively affordable. It's difficult. Your alternative to that is normally buying a policy on your own. And usually we see very high earners do that. Doctors do that. Lawyers do that, because those premiums are extremely expensive, and just it's really hard to afford. For what's available to you, look, search out all your options, and then be smart about, like Jenny was describing, you know whether if I have this policy, would my benefit just be canceled out by all these other things anyway, so that it's not really worth it. Most disability policies will have a minimum monthly benefit. So depending on your age, David's only, still in his 20s probably. So even a minimum monthly benefit until retirement age is going to be significant. We have people who contact us and they're already, in their 60s, close to retirement age. It often isn't really worth it for them to go through the rigmarole of appealing a denial when their benefit is going to be $100 a month for the next 4 months.
Ellen, could we go back a little bit? And I want to make sure that we have time to go to the pre-claim time period. Could you touch on a little bit about if somebody does get diagnosed with something or is feeling that they're having a hard time performing their tasks, who would they go to talk to about their company disability plan? What doctors might be best for them to speak to? Can you talk a little bit about doctor support and just the pre-claim period?
Yeah, that's super important. So again, it's read your policy. If you don't know if you have a policy, go to HR. They should get you a copy of that. You want to read, if you haven't been at the company very long, you want to read about the pre-existing exclusion and make sure that you're not, if you're gutting it out and trying to stay at work, don't leave, a week before your policy would have been in effect. We see people do that without knowing it. And there's no way to unring that bell. Like, you have to know going in what your exclusion period is going to be. And then as you have time to see a claim coming, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, MS, these diseases that tend to progress, just read your policy, know what you're looking at, what you're going to have to prove. First, you're going to have to prove that you can't do your own occupation. And then after a period of time, most policies switch to having to prove you can't do any occupation. Understand, I think, that insurance companies are set up, it's a, big major bureaucracy. They're governed by a set of regulations that require them to treat every claim the same. They can't have special rules for different claims. So they have a system that's set up, and it's set up to get in your medical information. So it's your medical records. It's what's written in your records. It's what tests you've had, what your doctors have said at your office visits, and then they're looking at whether those records support your doctor's opinion about your functional capacity to work. If your doctor says Jenny's disabled, she can't work anymore, can they see that playing out in your records? And they'll have somebody, often it's a nurse at the first level, they'll have somebody doing that initial screen. Jenny's doctor says she can't work, oh yeah, here are her test results. Here's, this has been coming, her disease is progressing. I agree with the doctor. The records support this conclusion, then you're awarded benefits. Sometimes that's super easy, right? Like when it's usually, ironically, it's when you don't have time to plan like this, your claim is going to be approved because it's very clear exactly what has happened. But when you have time to plan and see a claim coming, that's when it can be a little bit harder because you were working with this condition. You've had Parkinson's for a few years. You've, had this early onset cognitive impairment that nobody's really exactly sure what that was. And your doctor can say, this is the point at which you're disabled, but the insurance company will look at your records and say, you were working on Monday. I think you could have gone to work on Tuesday, and therefore we're denying your claim. So you want to anticipate that mismatch between maybe what your medical records say and what the insurance company is going to say they say. And there are some fabulous insurance companies that provide, great support for people who really need it. There are also some decisions that seem evil. Seems like this got routed to like, is there any possible way that we can deny this claim? Just find something, and so throughout all the records of your decline, they'll say, but you weren't limping. So,
Right.
what about all these other things I was? So yeah, with doctor support, you just want to make sure that it's there. You want to make sure it tells the story of any progression, if that's the type of illness that you're facing. You want to make sure that your doctor documents what's impairing your functional capacity, not just kind of what symptoms you're having, but what's preventing you from working. You want to make sure that your job description accurately reflects what you really do for work. And if it doesn't, you want to work with HR to make sure that it really reflects what you're required to do at work, so that it's pretty easy to see the story of, what happened to you and why you can't work.
And Ellen, could someone get fired and be terminated from their position if they are on long-term disability?
Yeah, the employer is not required to hold your job indefinitely. If they're large enough, they are required to give you those 3 months of job protected leave if you apply through FMLA. Not all employers are subject to FMLA. But especially as that period runs out, it really depends on the employer's policy, and they're all different. But yeah, you can, if you can't do your work, you can lose your job. And if this is more than just general information for people, if they're trying to think about how this applies to their claim because they just got fired, go talk to an attorney. Call an employment attorney. Make sure that you have somebody, very knowledgeable looking at your specific situation, and you're not the one trying to interpolate general information into what this means for you. Get some help doing that. It's often free to get that first initial review from someone.
I know we're nearly out of time. I wanted to put a quick plug in, looping back to something Jenny mentioned in the beginning about setting up a special needs trust for her son David with us. Those kinds of savings options exist because if someone with a disability inherits more than enough money to put their total asset count over $2,000, they can risk losing all of their benefits. So a little plug to parents, if you're thinking about funding future care needs with a life insurance policy, it may be wise to do things like have the wording on that policy say the beneficiary is the special needs trust for the exclusive benefit of child's name, because then it goes right into the trust as opposed to going to the child, which can create all kinds of turmoil. And though people with disabilities often have ABLE accounts, which is a similar kind of account insofar as money in it is generally not counted against someone for benefits, ABLE accounts in 2024 at least have a $24,000 or $18,000 a year maximum total contributions from everyone. So often not a great vessel for catching a life insurance policy, because even if the life insurance policy is below that $18,000 amount, what if someone earlier that year already put $5,000 into it or birthday money or whatever that is? So just a quick reminder to folks to really think carefully about that and that kind of wording. And then Ellen, Jenny, I had one final question that I wanted to make sure we addressed. Is someone who is maybe a parent signing up for these kinds of policies, what are the sorts of paperwork they want to make sure they keep, and who do they give it to, so that when it's time to file, the people who are doing that on their behalf, if the parent has passed away or is so disabled they can't do it on their own, that those people have the right information?
Yeah, I think it'll be different for every person. You want to check your policy about what the requirements are. Often all you need is to be employed to be eligible for benefits. So you just want to check with human resources to make sure you know what the coverage requirements are. If it goes beyond that, if you have to fill out a form to electively enroll, you want to make sure to keep a copy of any paperwork that you completed in order to receive benefits. You also want to check, if you are responsible for paying the premiums, you want to check to make sure that that's actually happening, to make sure you have a line item on your pay stub, that shows your disability benefits, your life insurance benefits going out, so that, yeah, if you ever do need to recreate whether you had coverage, you'll be able to reach for that paperwork and produce it.
And personally, and there's no secret to this, but what I do, Lucy, is I started this years ago. I have a green binder, and my siblings and my daughter know about this green binder, and it's just this household information about David. And I just have sheet protectors, and I have copies of each like a copy of a statement, a copy of a policy for everything that has to do with David. So if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, everybody would know, well, there's this green binder in Jen's office that has the information of what people would need to know. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think as a parent, we should all have some source where someone can go to see that information held for all. And I have, just for each of our life insurance policy and his trusts, I just have like one piece of paper that just has the contact information and who to call.
That's so helpful. And I wanted to thank you very much for your time and see if there were thoughts on where people should follow up if they had questions for you all in the future before we ended today.
Sure. I think the easiest thing is to just come to our website, www.insuranceappealconsultants.com. It's got all of our contact information. You can fill out questions on the web. You can call us. Happy to talk to anybody about anything, and to be like you said, Lucy, sort of the clearinghouse of, we promise, even if it's something that we can't help with, if it's all in our power to connect you with somebody who can help, we're happy to do that. We've got a fabulous network already of attorney referral partners who send us cases that they can't help with, and we send them back cases that we don't help with. So we're happy to hear from anybody about anything and try to help you get started.
And
Thank
a
you
little,
also.
plug for Ellen Lucy. She wrote a book too that we can offer people a PDF version for free. So if anybody needs help with life insurance or disability appeals, she wrote a how-to book for how to recover your benefits. So that's the sort of thing you can find on the website.
Thank you all very, very much. I want to thank families listening to this in the future, and we look forward to working with you all and sending families your way. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Lucy. Thanks, Ellen.
Lucy.